Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to a breaking news alert that freezes you in your tracks. The President of the United States stands at a podium, signs an executive order, and declares, effective immediately, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration is dissolved. The launch pads at Cape Canaveral go silent. The lights at Mission Control in Houston are turned off. The James Webb Space Telescope is abandoned to drift aimlessly in the dark. And the astronauts currently orbiting aboard the International Space Station? They're simply told, find your own way home. It sounds like the plot of a dystopian movie, doesn't it? But in a world of economic uncertainty and shifting political priorities, some people genuinely ask, why spend billions on space when we have problems here on Earth? So let's play this dangerous game. What if the US government actually did it? What if NASA was shut down forever? Would we save the economy? Or would we trigger a chain of events that destroys our technology, our safety, and our future? Welcome to the timeline where America stays grounded. To understand the magnitude of this collapse, we first have to look at reality. In our current timeline, NASA is the backbone of global aerospace innovation. From monitoring climate change to developing the technologies in your smartphone, its influence is everywhere. However, there's a massive misconception about the cost. If you ask the average American how much of the federal budget goes to NASA, many will guess 10%, maybe even 20%. They imagine a giant money pit. In reality, NASA receives less than 0.5% of the federal budget. But in our alternative scenario, facts don't matter, perception does. Imagine a massive economic depression hits the United States. Inflation is out of control. Debt is skyrocketing, and a populist political movement rises to power with a single slogan, Earth First. They argue that every dollar sent to Mars is a dollar stolen from a hungry family in Ohio. The pressure becomes undeniable. The decision is made. The budget is cut to zero. NASA is no more. The split in history happens fast. The immediate justification is fiscal responsibility. The government promises that the $25 billion saved annually will solve homelessness and fix the roads. But as the ink dries on the shutdown order, the law of unintended consequences begins to tear the country apart. We aren't just talking about locking the doors to a few offices. We're talking about dismantling an ecosystem that has existed for over 60 years. And the first casualty isn't science, it's the economy. Let's look at day one after the shutdown. The most obvious victims are the 18,000 civil servants who work directly for NASA. Scientists, engineers, astrobiologists, some of the smartest minds on the planet are instantly unemployed. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. NASA works with thousands of private contractors. We're talking about giants like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman, but also thousands of small mom-and-pop machine shops across the country that specialize in making specific bolts, heat shields, or software for spacecraft. When NASA cancels its contracts, the revenue stream for these companies evaporates. Estimates suggest that for every one job at NASA, there are over 10 jobs supported in the private sector. That means over 300,000 high-tech jobs vanish effectively overnight. Entire regions would face ruin. The Space Coast in Florida, Huntsville in Alabama, and parts of Houston, Texas, are built around the space industry. Without NASA, hotels empty out. Restaurants close. Real estate markets in these areas crash as engineers sell their homes to move elsewhere. These gleaming hubs of the future would quickly turn into the new Rust Belt, filled with abandoned high-tech facilities and decaying launch towers. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wait a minute, what about Elon Musk? What about SpaceX? Wouldn't private companies just take over and save the day? This is the biggest myth of the modern space age. In reality, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others are not independent of NASA. They are partners. NASA is their biggest customer. NASA provided the funding to develop the Falcon 9. NASA pays for the cargo runs to the space station. NASA provides the deep space communication networks and the fundamental research data that private companies use. If NASA shuts down, the government contracts disappear. SpaceX suddenly loses its primary source of revenue. The business case for colonizing Mars collapses because there is no government backing to offset the massive risk. Private space companies would survive, but they would change drastically. They would stop exploring. They would focus 100% on what makes immediate profit, launching communication satellites for TV and internet. The dream of making humanity multiplanetary would die. The private sector would become a delivery service, not an explorer. But let's bring this down to Earth. How would this affect you? Your daily life? You might not realize it, but NASA is a silent guardian of your safety. Consider the weather. NASA builds and launches the most advanced weather satellites that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, uses. Without NASA's research and development, our ability to track hurricanes, predict routes, and monitor climate change would degrade rapidly. Imagine a Category 5 hurricane forming in the Atlantic. In our world, we see it days in advance. In a world without NASA, our satellites are aging and failing. We might not see the storm's true path until it's too late to evacuate. Then there is the tech drain. NASA solves problems that no one else dares to touch. They invented memory foam, scratch-resistant lenses, invisible braces, and crucial components in CAT scans and heart pumps. They pushed the boundaries of miniaturization, which led to the camera in your phone. Without this engine of pure innovation, technological progress slows down. We enter a period of stagnation. We stop inventing the impossible simply because there is no one paying to solve impossible problems anymore. Now, let's look at the global map. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does geopolitics. If the United States steps back from the final frontier, who steps in? The answer is obvious: China and Russia. The China National Space Administration has been rapidly catching up to the US. In a world without NASA, the race is over. China wins by default. Within a decade of the NASA shutdown, we would see a permanent Chinese research base on the moon's south pole. They would control the most valuable real estate in the solar system, including water ice and helium-3, a potential fuel for future fusion reactors. The psychological impact would be devastating for America. Just as Sputnik shocked the US in the 1950s, seeing Chinese astronauts walking on Mars while American rockets rust in museums would signal the end of American global dominance. The US would become a second-tier power, forced to buy satellite data and space access from Beijing. We would be grounded, watching others write the history of the future. There is one final consequence, and it is the most terrifying of all. It's not about economics or politics, it's about survival. NASA runs the Planetary Defense Coordination Office. Their job is to watch the sky for near-Earth objects, asteroids, and comets that could strike our planet. They are the Sentinels. They map the trajectories of rocks that could wipe out a city or even civilization. If NASA is shut down, the lights go out at these observatories. The Sentinel goes blind. Imagine an asteroid the size of a football stadium hurtling towards Earth. In our current timeline, NASA might spot it years in advance, giving us a chance to deflect it like they proved with the DART mission. But in the no NASA timeline, we wouldn't see it coming. We might get a few days warning from amateur astronomers, but by then, it would be too late. The savings from the budget cut would mean nothing if an asteroid impacts the Atlantic Ocean. The loss of NASA is more than just a loss of hardware. It is a spiritual loss for humanity. Space exploration is one of the few things that unites us. It reminds us that we are small, that we are fragile, and that we are capable of greatness. When we saw the first photo of Earth rising over the moon, it changed the human consciousness. It gave us the perspective to care for our own planet. Without that outward gaze, our vision turns inward. We become more tribal, more focused on fighting over scraps on Earth rather than expanding the pie in the stars. We teach our children that the frontier is closed, that the great adventures are over, that there is nothing left to discover. Is that a world you want to live in? So I have a question for you to answer in the comments below. Critics say we have too many problems on Earth to worry about space, but supporters say space is the solution to Earth's problems. If you were the president, and you had to choose between cutting NASA to fund social programs or doubling NASA's budget to reach Mars, which button would you press? Let me know your verdict. And if you think private companies could truly replace the government in deep space, tell me why I'm wrong. History is full of nations that stopped exploring. They turned inward, burned their ships, and eventually they were left behind by time. A world without NASA is a world where humanity hits a ceiling we built ourselves. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a dark timeline, make sure to subscribe. We are exploring new what-if scenarios every week. Next time, we are going even further back in time to ask, what if the internet was never invented? How different would your life be today? You don't want to miss that one. Thanks for watching, and keep looking up.